Military deception is as old as warfare itself. The Trojan horse, the ghost armies of D-Day, the inflatable tanks and plywood aircraft that fooled German reconnaissance before the Normandy invasion. The principle has never changed. If you can make the enemy see what isn't there, you can make them waste their most valuable weapons on targets that cost you nothing, while your real weapons operate freely, unseen and untargeted, doing the work that wins wars. Days ago on the Eastern Front, Ukrainian combat engineers applied this ancient principle with modern sophistication, and the result was one of the most cost-effective deception operations of the entire war. 2 Russian Kh-101 stealth cruise missiles, each worth approximately $13 million, each representing months of factory production time under sanctions pressure, each carrying a 400-kilogram warhead designed to destroy hardened military targets, struck what Russian intelligence had identified as a Ukrainian HIMARS rocket artillery battery positioned in a rear area. The missiles hit with precision. The targets were destroyed. Russian intelligence reported the strike as a successful elimination of a high-value Ukrainian weapon system. The targets were made of wood, canvas, paint, and a few $100s worth of thermal emitters and radio equipment. The real HIMARS battery was 80 kilometers away, firing GMLRS rockets at Russian ammunition depots at the exact moment Russia's cruise missiles were turning plywood into splinters. The Decoys, Ukrainian military deception units, specialized engineering teams trained in the art of creating realistic mock-ups of military equipment, have been operating throughout the war, building decoys of everything from tanks and artillery to radar systems and command posts. Their work is a blend of craftsmanship, engineering, and intelligence analysis. They must understand not only how to build a replica that looks correct to the human eye, but how to create one that fools the electronic sensors, thermal cameras, synthetic aperture radar, signals intelligence that modern reconnaissance relies on. The HIMARS decoy project began approximately 3 weeks before the Russian strike. A Ukrainian deception team was tasked with creating 2 replica M142 HIMARS launcher vehicles that would be convincing enough to fool Russian aerial and satellite reconnaissance into misidentifying them as genuine weapon systems. The goal was specific and strategic: draw a Russian precision strike against the decoys, thereby wasting irreplaceable cruise missiles on worthless targets while simultaneously revealing information about Russian targeting procedures, response times, and strike capabilities. The physical replicas were constructed from wooden frames, 2x4 lumber cut and assembled into the approximate dimensions and proportions of the M142 HIMARS vehicle. The launcher pod and the distinctive rectangular box that sits on the back of the truck and contains 6 GMLRS rocket tubes was built from plywood panels and reinforcing struts, shaped to match the pod's dimensions within centimeters. The cab section was fabricated from sheet metal and canvas stretched over a wooden skeleton, with windows painted in flat black to simulate tinted glass. The entire assembly was mounted on the chassis of 2 decommissioned Ural cargo trucks. Real vehicles with real wheels, real tires, and real suspensions that gave the decoys the ground footprint, tire tracks, and dimensional proportions that satellite imagery analysis would expect to see. The replicas were painted in the same NATO standard camouflage pattern used on genuine HIMARS vehicles, a 3-color scheme that Ukrainian deception teams have studied and replicated with precision. Stenciled markings, unit identifiers, and even simulated wear patterns, mud splashes, paint scratches, dust accumulation, were added to give the decoys the lived-in appearance of vehicles that had been operating in the field for months, rather than the pristine look of new equipment. But visual accuracy alone would not be sufficient. Russian reconnaissance does not rely solely on optical imagery. It uses thermal infrared sensors that detect the heat signatures of vehicle engines, electronic emissions detectors that identify the electromagnetic signatures of military communications equipment, and synthetic aperture radar that can detect metallic objects and their dimensions, even through camouflage netting and cloud cover. Ukrainian engineers addressed each of these detection methods. Thermal signature: metal drums filled with hot water, heated by small propane burners, were placed inside the engine compartment area and near the launcher pod to simulate the thermal footprint of an idling diesel engine and recently fired rocket motors. The thermal emitters were calibrated to produce signatures consistent with the temperatures that a HIMARS vehicle would generate, hot enough to register on infrared sensors, but not so hot as to appear anomalous. The propane burners were operated on timers that cycled the heat output to mimic the patterns of an engine that was started, run for a period, and then shut down, the kind of intermittent thermal activity that Russian analysts would expect from a vehicle that was being used for periodic fire missions. Electromagnetic signature, a small battery-powered radio transmitter, commercially available and costing less than $200, was placed near each decoy and programmed to emit brief, encrypted-appearing radio bursts on frequencies associated with HIMARS fire control and communications. The bursts were timed to coincide with known Ukrainian HIMARS firing patterns, creating a signals intelligence signature that Russian electronic monitoring stations would correlate with HIMARS operational activity. Radar reflectivity, corner reflectors, simple metal structures that reflect radar signals with high intensity, were concealed within the decoy structures to ensure that synthetic aperture radar would return a signal consistent with the metallic mass of a genuine HIMARS vehicle rather than the wooden construction of the replica. The total cost of both decoys, materials, labor, thermal emitters, radio transmitters, and radar reflectors was approximately $3,000. Debate. The decoys were positioned at a location carefully selected by Ukrainian intelligence to appear as a plausible HIMARS firing position, a flat area beside a paved road in a rear area zone, approximately 40 kilometers behind the front line, with clear sight lines and access to multiple escape routes. Genuine HIMARS batteries use similar positions, locations where the vehicles can drive in, set up, fire a salvo of rockets, and relocate within minutes to avoid counter-battery fire. The selected site had been used by actual Ukrainian artillery units in the past, which meant that Russian intelligence databases would already have it flagged as a known Ukrainian firing position, adding to the credibility of the deception. The decoys were moved into position under cover of darkness and arranged in a configuration consistent with a two-launcher HIMARS battery in a firing posture. The launcher pods elevated at the angle they would assume during a fire mission. Tire tracks were created on the access road. Ukrainian engineers drove a heavy truck back and forth to produce the kind of ground disturbance that a HIMARS battery's movements would create. Camouflage netting was erected over the decoys, not enough to fully conceal them, but enough to appear as a hasty concealment effort that a real battery would employ between fire missions. The thermal emitters were activated. The radio transmitters began their scheduled broadcasts. The corner reflectors stood ready to answer any radar query. Then the Ukrainian deception team withdrew and waited. Russian response. Russian intelligence detected the decoy battery within approximately 36 hours. The detection came through multiple channels, exactly as Ukrainian planners had intended. Russian signals intelligence stations intercepted the radio transmissions from the decoy site and classified them as HIMARS-associated communications. Russian satellite imagery, collected during a pass over the area, showed two objects consistent with HIMARS vehicle dimensions at a known Ukrainian firing position, partially covered by camouflage netting, with fresh vehicle tracks on the access road. Thermal imagery from a Russian reconnaissance drone confirmed heat signatures consistent with idling vehicle engines at the site. The intelligence was assessed at the Russian operational level as high confidence. A Ukrainian HIMARS battery had been located at a known firing position with corroborating evidence from signals, imagery, and thermal sources. Given the strategic importance of HIMARS to Ukrainian operations, the system had been responsible for destroying dozens of Russian headquarters, ammunition depots, and logistics nodes over the course of the war. The target was classified as a high-priority strike requiring precision weapons. Russian command authorized a cruise missile strike. Two Kh-101 air-launched cruise missiles, fired from a Tu-95MS strategic bomber operating from Russian airspace, were tasked against the target. The Kh-101 is one of Russia's most advanced and most expensive precision weapons, a stealthy GPS-guided cruise missile with a range of over 5,000 kilometers, a 400-kilogram conventional warhead, and a unit cost estimated at approximately $13 million. Each missile represents months of production time at Russian defense factories that are struggling under sanctions to maintain output. Russia's Kh-101 inventory is finite and shrinking. Every missile fired is one that cannot be replaced on any timeline relevant to this war. The strike. 01. The two Kh-101 missiles struck the Decoy site at approximately 4:20 on a cool, damp early morning. The kind of pre-dawn hour that Russian strike planners prefer for cruise missile attacks because reduced visibility complicates Ukrainian air defense response. The missiles approached at low altitude, following pre-programmed waypoints that brought them to the target coordinates with the GPS precision for which the Kh-101 is designed. Ukrainian surveillance cameras positioned near the Decoy site, hidden in buildings and natural features at safe distances, captured both impacts. The first missile struck the first decoy directly, the 400-kilogram warhead detonating on the plywood and canvas structure and obliterating it in a fireball that sent pieces of lumber, canvas, and truck chassis scattering across a 100-meter radius. The second missile struck approximately 12 seconds later, hitting the second decoy with equal precision. The explosion was equally dramatic and equally destructive of plywood. The mushroom clouds of smoke and debris that rose from the two impact sites were visible for kilometers. To a Russian reconnaissance satellite passing overhead in the hours following the strike, the damage assessment would look exactly as expected. Two destroyed vehicles at a confirmed HIMARS position with blast craters, debris fields, and residual fires consistent with the destruction of military hardware. Russian intelligence initially assessed the strike as a success. Two HIMARS launchers destroyed, a significant reduction in Ukrainian precision strike capability in the sector. The assessment was briefed up the chain of command. It was entered into operational databases. It may well have been included in reports to Moscow as evidence of effective Russian air operations against high-value Ukrainian targets. The real HIMARS. While Russian cruise missiles were converting $3,000 worth of plywood into expensive kindling, the real Ukrainian HIMARS battery, the actual weapon system that Russian intelligence believed it had just destroyed, was operating approximately 80 kilometers to the southeast. At or 4:35, 15 minutes after the cruise missiles destroyed the decoys, the HIMARS battery fired a salvo of 4 GMLRS rockets at a Russian ammunition depot that had been identified through intelligence gathered over the preceding week. The rockets, guided by GPS to their target coordinates, struck the depot with the devastating precision that has made HIMARS the most feared weapon in Ukrainian service. The depot detonated in a chain of secondary explosions that lasted over an hour, destroying thousands of rounds of artillery ammunition, mortar shells, and rocket propellant that had been stockpiled for a Russian offensive. 40 minutes later, the HIMARS battery relocated to a new position and fired 2 additional rockets at a Russian logistics hub, a fuel and supply distribution point that served units across an adjacent sector. Both rockets hit. The hub burned. Russian supply trucks that had been en route to the hub were diverted, adding hours in fuel consumption to their journeys and delaying critical deliveries to frontline units. The real HIMARS battery relocated again, disappearing into the Ukrainian rear area using the shoot-and-scoot tactics that have made it nearly impossible for Russia to target genuine HIMARS vehicles. It was never detected, never targeted, and never threatened by the Russian strike that had been aimed at its wooden replicas 80 kilometers away. Total accounting, Sonanensferinuren Onmanam-1. Russian expenditure, 2 Kh-101 cruise missiles at $13 million each, $26 million, plus the operational costs of the Tu-95MS bomber flight, fuel, crew, mission planning, airspace coordination, approximately $500,000 or $1 million. Total Russian expenditure, approximately $27 million. What Russia destroyed: 2 wooden frames, some canvas, 2 decommissioned truck chassis, a few propane burners, 2 radio transmitters, and several liters of camouflage paint. Value, approximately $3,000. What Ukraine destroyed in the same time window using the real HIMARS: 1 ammunition depot with contents, $815 million. 1 logistics hub with fuel and supplies, $25 million. Total Ukrainian strikes, $10–20 million in confirmed Russian losses. Ukrainian GMLRS expenditure, 6 rockets at approximately $10,000 each, $660,000. Net exchange. Russia spent $26.5 million destroying $3,000 in decoys. Ukraine spent $663,000 decoys plus GMLRS rockets, destroying $20 million in Russian military assets. Total net Russian loss, approximately $36.547 million, accounting for both the wasted missiles and the destroyed targets. Strategic implications. The Kh-101 cruise missile inventory is one of Russia's most critical and most irreplaceable strategic assets. A finite stockpile of precision weapons that represents decades of investment in research, development, and manufacturing capability. Each missile represents not just its $13 million price tag, but months of factory production at facilities where Western sanctions have systematically disrupted supply chains for the precision guidance systems, satellite navigation receivers, stealth radar-absorbing materials, and compact turbofan engines that the Kh-101 requires. Russia's pre-war Kh-101 inventory was estimated by Western intelligence at several hundred missiles, a number that seemed formidable in February 2022, but that nearly 4 years of continuous war have dramatically reduced. Russia has fired hundreds of cruise missiles at Ukrainian targets since the invasion began. Strikes against cities, energy infrastructure, military installations, and civilian buildings that have consumed the stockpile at a rate that far exceeds production capacity. Western analysts estimate that Russia can produce approximately 40 to 60 Kh-101 missiles per year under current sanctions conditions, a rate that does not come close to replacing combat expenditure, let alone rebuilding the pre-war inventory. Every Kh-101 fired at a plywood decoy is one fewer missile available for strikes against genuine Ukrainian military targets, Ukrainian power stations that supply civilian heating and lighting, or Ukrainian command infrastructure that coordinates the defense of the country. The opportunity cost of wasting 2 missiles on decoys is measured not just in the $26 million of direct cost, but in the Ukrainian assets that those missiles will now never destroy. Ukrainian deception operations exploit a fundamental and irresolvable Russian vulnerability: the enormous time, cost, and institutional complexity of the intelligence-to-strike cycle for cruise missile attacks. Each Kh-101 strike is not a simple point-and-shoot operation. It requires satellite or drone reconnaissance to identify and photograph the target, intelligence analysis by trained specialists to confirm the target's identity and assess its military value, command authorization through multiple echelons to allocate a cruise missile from the finite inventory, mission planning by bomber crews that must calculate flight routes avoiding Ukrainian air defenses, the bomber flight itself from air bases deep in Russian territory, and the missile launch and guidance to target. This cycle takes hours to days, involves dozens of specialized personnel, and costs millions of dollars in operational resources beyond the missile itself. A Ukrainian deception team can create a target that triggers this entire costly cycle in a few days, using materials that cost $3,000 and labor that costs even less, forcing Russia to invest its most expensive and most irreplaceable weapons against targets made of lumber and canvas. The moment the missile leaves the bomber, the $13 million is spent regardless of what it hits. Russia cannot recall a Kh-101 in flight. It cannot refund the cost when the warhead detonates on plywood. The money, the missile, the factory time, the specialized components, all of it is gone, converted to splinters and a crater in a field. The asymmetry is devastating, and it is infinitely scalable. Ukrainian deception units can produce decoys faster, cheaper, and in greater quantities than Russian factories can produce cruise missiles. The materials are commercially available: lumber, canvas, paint, propane, basic electronics. The skills required are those of carpenters and electricians, not aerospace engineers. A single deception team can build multiple decoy batteries in a week. Russia needs months to build the missiles that will destroy them. Every decoy that draws a Russian strike is a cruise missile wasted. Every cruise missile wasted is one that will never hit a Ukrainian power plant, a Ukrainian military headquarters, or a Ukrainian city full of civilians. The economics of deception are entirely and permanently in Ukraine's favor, because the cost of the bait will always be a fraction of the cost of the weapon sent to destroy it. Since February 2022, Russia has lost approximately 149,000 soldiers killed and wounded, over 11,600 tanks, nearly 24,000 armored vehicles, hundreds of cruise missiles and ballistic missiles expended against Ukrainian targets, some of them real, some of them ghosts made of wood and paint, and with each missile wasted on a phantom target, Russia's ability to strike real targets diminishes, its strategic reserves shrink, and the day approaches when the missile inventory is too depleted to sustain the kind of precision strike campaigns that have been one of Russia's few remaining asymmetric advantages in this war. Somewhere in a Ukrainian workshop tonight, engineers are building the next set of decoys, wooden tanks with thermal emitters, plywood artillery pieces with radar reflectors, canvas rocket launchers with radio simulators. Each one costs less than a good bicycle. Each one will potentially draw fire worth millions of dollars. Each one is a tiny, inexpensive investment in the strategic exhaustion of an enemy whose most precious weapons are being consumed by the oldest trick in the book. Somewhere in a Russian factory, workers are struggling to assemble the next KE-101, soldering guidance circuits with smuggled microchips, fitting turbofan engines with components that were never designed for this application, painting stealth coatings with materials that sanctions have made scarce. Their missile might fly 1,000 kilometers. It might evade Ukrainian air defenses. It might hit its target with 2-meter precision. That target might be another pile of painted lumber in a field. Ukraine fights, Ukraine deceives. Ukraine makes Russia pay for its own blindness. This is Iron Front. The battlefield speaks louder than propaganda.